just sounds like blessed work, and I just I'm honored to be here with you. I I think what I'll do is talk for about a half an hour, and I put some things together that I'd like to share with you. Donna, it reminds me that you need to make me a co-host so I can put the PowerPoint up on the screen at some point. Um, and then we'll open it up for your questions, and I'll do the best I can to respond. So I arrived in Israel in 1972. I gave myself 2 weeks to figure out the Middle East. That's what I was planning to do, and that was 50 years ago. So I'm still working on figuring things out. But what happened to me unexpectedly was that I simply fell in love with this place. I felt wanted. I felt at home in a way that I had never experienced before. And I just, after a few months in Israel, extending my stay, I just realized that I felt more strongly about staying than I did about going back to Berkeley, which is where I'd been living for the last 5 years. 67 to 72, I was in Berkeley, California, and very active in the anti-war movement. And yet I just felt I was just conquered by the exuberance and the warmth of this country, and I stayed longer, and then became a citizen and served in the army for an abbreviated service because I already had a son. So if you have children, you don't do the full 3 years, and then I did reserve duty for 15 years after that, including serving in the first war in Lebanon for the first 3 weeks of that war in 1982. I lived on a kibbutz for 15 years, a collective agricultural settlement in the Galilee. And I did work in agriculture and childcare, but my profession is organizational development. And I went to work for the kibbutz movement. And then later on, when we left the kibbutz, I became an independent consultant. And as Donna said, I work particularly on the issue of dignity in organizations, helping managers and teams identify where people are being treated with dignity and with indignity, and building programs with them on how to shift the balance so that both the clients and the staff are treated with dignity. And in 1978, I discovered the new peace movement, Peace Now, and began to identify some of the issues that were problematic for me in Israel, despite my love for the country. And I became active in the peace movement, demonstrating and leafleting and talking to people and organizing events in order to help Israelis see the need for ending the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, which we had conquered in the '67 war. I felt and still feel that this was detrimental to our future and to the future of the Palestinian people, and that you know, as a Jew, I feel that I have an obligation to humanity, not just to my own people. And I feel that occupying and dominating another people now for 57 years since the 67 war is just bad for everyone. But at any rate, I was active as a volunteer. And then 12 years ago, I decided to go to work for my grandchildren. Today, I feel that my true employer are my 4 grandchildren. And my job is to help make Israel the kind of place that the 4 of them want to live their lives in. They all have American passports. They could leave if they wanted to. And I really, it's kind of, it might sound like a joke, but I'm quite serious about the fact that I feel that my work now is devoted to seeing if we can recuperate from this terrible blow and rebuild so that the future will be a lot brighter than it looks this evening. So I went to work professionally for the peace movement, first with an organization called Sulha, which means reconciliation, bringing Palestinians and Israelis together for heart-to-heart, people-to-people contact. And then I went to work after 7 years of running that organization. I moved to the Bereaved Families Forum, which is an organization of 700 Palestinian and Israeli families that have lost a family member to the conflict and have committed themselves to making peace. Their slogan is, "We don't want you for a member," because in order to become a member, you have to have lost someone in your family. And after a few years with the forum, I joined the organization I now work with called Achvat Amim, which means Solidarity of Nations. And I will put the link in the chat. So if you're interested, you can take a look. What we do is we bring young people, mostly young people, but there's no age limit, to a 4-month program 3 times a year. The 4-month program includes 3 days a week of working for a human rights organization and 2 days a week of study, trying to go deep into the roots and the implications of the conflict in Israel and Palestine. So it's an inspiring movement connected to other peace and human rights organizations. And we've just started our fall cohort this week, and we have a 20-year-old participant and a 72-year-old participant. So it's really wide open to anyone who has the motivation to come aboard. So that's enough about me. Now I would like to just share with you my experience of the October 7th attack on Israel and what's happened since then. I was telling Donna that the window of my study here looks west, and on October 9th and 10th, I experienced watching missiles come towards my window and then watching them being intercepted by our own counter missiles. And we spent a lot of time in the bomb shelter, and it was quite frightening. But the most horrifying thing was the actual attack on October 7th. And I can say that there is almost no one in Israel who doesn't know someone or knows someone who knows someone who was killed or kidnapped in that invasion. It was a terrible failure on the part of our leaders and our army. which is being acknowledged by everyone but our prime minister, who is expert at passing the blame on to other people. And I felt, along with the overwhelming majority of Israelis, that we had to respond militarily to this attack, which is what we did. First with massive bombing, and 3 weeks later with the entry of ground forces into Gaza. But that was 10 months ago, and what started as a completely justified reaction to this invasion has now become an ongoing war that has no objective that's reachable, and is losing its support in the Israeli public steadily, day by day. One of the things that's really central to the Israeli ethos is that this is finally, after 2,000 years of Jewish homelessness, we have a home, and our home is a place where we can be safe. And suddenly on October 7th, that bubble was burst, and we no longer feel the kind of trust and safety that we felt before October 7th. And beyond that, the doing everything and anything that needs to be done to bring the kidnapped hostages home, both the ones that are still alive and the bodies of those who have been killed or have died in captivity. That is just central to the way Israelis see ourselves and our country. So there's an enormous wave of bitterness about the repeated failure to achieve an agreement with our enemy and to bring the hostages home. People seem, the government seems unwilling to pay the price for our failure on October 7th. And the price is that we will have to make an agreement that brings the hostages home and that releases hundreds of Palestinian prisoners presently being held in our jails. And this justifiably worries people, releasing these prisoners, but the worry about the prisoners is far junior to our concern about the hostages and this ongoing sense of betrayal that we are confronting. So myself and hundreds of thousands of other Israelis go out on Saturday nights and sometimes midweek to demonstrate against the intransigence of our own government. Hamas has also been intransigent and has been difficult and has put up obstacles. But, when people point to Hamas's culpability, what I say is that I'm an Israeli, and I can only be responsible for the government that I allowed to be put in power here. The Palestinians are going to have to deal with Hamas, but my government has thrown, even in today's newspaper, another of a repeated series of articles about the many times that our prime minister has undermined or disempowered his negotiators, and has avoided making a deal. And it's become increasingly transparent to people that the reason for this is that once there is a ceasefire and the hostages are back, there will be a reckoning, and he will be called to order about his responsibility for what has happened. And the man is intent on maintaining his power and staying in office. And I think he recognizes that a ceasefire and movement forward, negotiation with the Palestinians, is going to mean that his tenure will come to an end. So he will do anything in his power to prevent that. So it's a grim setting, a grim situation. The word helpless is what people share very often, that we feel that we don't have the power. Despite our demonstrations, we don't have the power to make a regime change that's needed. And meanwhile, in addition to the 1,200 Israelis who were killed on October 7th, tens of thousands of Israelis cannot go home, both from the area surrounding Gaza and from the northern border. 715 soldiers have been killed. 2,000 soldiers are moderately to seriously wounded. And that is just unacceptable. But in addition, we are forced to confront the fact that 40,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th, 11,000 of them children and 7,000 of them women, and many other thousands civilian men who had nothing to do with the attack on Israel. And one of the most upsetting things for me personally is that most Israelis are unwilling to confront and to look with clear eyes at what is happening to the Palestinians who live in Gaza. 70% of the buildings in Gaza have been destroyed. Life is unlivable there. Disease, polio has appeared, skin diseases, the water is undrinkable. And our media is complicit in hiding the reality in Gaza from the public. If I want to see what's going on in Gaza, I have to go into the internet, to international websites, because my own media, including the liberal media, is towing the line and really is not showing us what's happening. But even if they were showing it, the hardening of the hearts of Israelis is one of the hardest things for me to accept or to confront. When I came here in 1972, I experienced a very friendly, warm, accepting, eager, friendly country, and we are not that way anymore. And of course, these are generalizations. And when I go to the demonstrations, I look around and I see the Israelis I fell in love with, the good-hearted, decent people who really do care. But there are 30% of the country, according to the polls, is still supporting Netanyahu and his government, and elections are only set for 2026. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. And it's difficult for people to acknowledge that we really need to see everyone and everyone's perspective. And, one of the hardest things in discussions with Israelis, one of the hardest things for people to get is that we will only be safe in Israel when the Palestinians feel safe in Palestine. That our security depends on their security. And as long as they are dominated, as long as they feel, as they see our army in the streets, and I'm talking about the West Bank as well as Gaza, as long as they do not have the opportunity to live their lives in freedom and to elect their political leaders and to go off to work and not have to. One of my Palestinian friends tells me that he counts his children at the end of the day to make sure everyone's come home. There is an army presence throughout Palestine, and it's really difficult for Israelis to see that perspective that only a secure, safe Palestinian can be counted on to go about living his life rather than to be looking for a way to exact revenge from the people who are dominating him. I'm going to do a very quick. Am I co-host? Okay. I'm going to very quickly just share some of the try to consolidate some of this for you. So I'm going to just whip through some slides. Can you see this? No, you can't. Let's see. Share. How about now? Is this
Yes.
you can make this out?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So here basically is the situation as I see it at the moment. This is the 349th day since October 7th. A baby named Kfir Bibas marked his first birthday somewhere in the tunnels beneath Gaza. There are still 101 hostages in Gaza, alive and dead, and no agreement about their release is on the horizon. Israel has no plan for the day after the war. President Biden does have a plan, a reasonable plan, but people joke about wishing they could vote for President Biden because our prime minister really has given no indication of how he intends to carry through once there is some kind of ceasefire. The IDF is growing weary. I would add that many forces are being shifted to the northern border, but the reservists who go to war in Gaza and get called up repeatedly are wearing out, and Hamas keeps renewing themselves. No matter how many Hamasniks we kill, there are more coming and volunteering. The west bank of the Jordan River, the occupied territories, are boiling over. A major eruption is likely there. The danger of a major military conflict, particularly since the beeper bombings of the last 3 days, the danger of a major military conflict there, which will lead us into a regional conflict with about 6 fronts, if you begin counting Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and Gaza. I mean, we will have our hands full. Netanyahu is not speaking to his defense minister, and he's trying to fire him. The declared goals of the war, the collapse of Hamas and the release of the hostages, are nowhere near fulfillment, and the government's failure and abandonment of our citizens are still resounding throughout the Israeli public, and people increasingly are losing their patience. So that's sort of the situation in a nutshell. And I'm not going to assume that people have the historical background. So I am going to try to do a thumbnail review of some of the salient points, and then I will stop and I'll be eager to hear what it is that you'd like to hear about. But let's see. If I go back to sharing with you. Yeah. So let me just do this quickly. This is a picture of the Palestinians from the Palestinian perspective. If you start on the left side of the screen, what you see is Palestine before the foundation of the state, the founding of the state. All of the green area was settled by Arabs. And in the white area, you see some of the early settlements of Israelis in the land. If you move to the next panel, what you will see is, I'm sorry, the UN partition plan, which was offered to the Arabs, and they didn't accept it. Instead, they attacked us. But had they accepted it, many people don't realize that the two-state solution was offered by the UN in 1947, and Palestine would have had 48% of the land, and Israel would have had 52%. And now, since they didn't accept that, and the war was completed with the third panel, which is where you see here, 1949 to 1967, the West Bank, Palestine, where it says Palestine, that was controlled by Jordan, and Gaza, down below on the left, is controlled by Egypt. And that was the situation until 1967. After the war in 1967, Israel conquered the West Bank, and what remains of Palestinian settlements today, Palestinian homes, are in the green part of the West Bank and in Gaza. So another view of the West Bank, what you see in red are the Palestinian villages and cities, and in blue are Israeli settlements where people are living contrary to international law throughout what they consider to be God's gift to the Jewish people, the whole land of Israel. And this is the contended West Bank, where I said that violence is likely to erupt. So basically what I'm saying is that this central issue, the occupation of Palestinian territory, is really going to have to be dealt with. And there will not be peace until we end the occupation. That people will not ever accept living without equal rights from the river to the sea. And today there are 14 million people living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, about half of them Palestinian, half of them Israeli Jews. And we need to find a way to see to it that everyone has equal rights. So that is my thumbnail sketch to sort of bring us up to date about where we are. I mean, I was firing off terms like the West Bank and assuming that people knew what I was talking about. I hope it's a little bit clearer. And I'll just say that the good news about this current grim situation is that Palestine is back on the world map. I hate the way that they got onto the map, but until October 7th, Palestine as an issue was being swept under the carpet. And there was an expression that was used here in Israel frequently. The expression was managing the conflict. We're not going to resolve the conflict, we're going to manage the conflict. And I think it was a bubble that has burst on October 7th. People deluded themselves into believing that there could be some kind of stability, even though we were continuing the occupation. And that bubble burst, as I say. And now, so I really consider it good news that it has been brought back into the foreground that we're going to have to solve this issue with the Palestinians. If you remember, the tiny country, Vietnam, drove the most powerful military force in the world out of their country in 1975. You cannot, unless you kill everyone, you cannot overcome people's desire for freedom and for a decent life. And I think people are slowly waking up to the fact that that's also the case here. The other positive thing that's happened is that Israelis have been aroused even before October 7th, when the government of Netanyahu attempted to corrupt the legal system. People came into the streets, people demonstrated who had never demonstrated in their lives. So I think direct action and taking the future in our hands is one of the fruits of this bitter experience, both before the war and after it. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis who have never considered themselves politically engaged are today engaged. And I think that's a very positive, force. I'll just end by mentioning the attack through beepers and walkie-talkies in Lebanon. Even I was amazed at the brilliance and the ingenuity of our security forces to be able to pull something like that off. But I think it was a terrible mistake, and it drives us farther and farther from peace. The fact that 40 people were killed and about 4,000 people were wounded, many of them not fighters in Lebanon, is only embittering and humiliating Hezbollah. And people forget that repeatedly since the beginning of the war, when Hezbollah, to support Hamas, joined the war, Hezbollah has declared over and over, including this afternoon, that when there is a ceasefire in Gaza, they will stop bombing Israel. So Netanyahu has driven us farther from the possibility that that will happen. And still, the key to all of this is an agreement in Gaza with Hamas. And if Hezbollah is true to its word, which we have no reason to doubt, I mean, they've said it so many times, if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, the imminent war that I think we're facing this evening here with the North, with the Hezbollah in Lebanon, that war can be averted. But it takes the will to move ahead and the courage to negotiate with the enemy. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'm really eager to hear what your questions are, what is puzzling you, what troubles you, anything. So thank you. Thank you for listening.
Yoav, thank you so much for that clear-eyed, really very important presentation. You did it so well. And I think people are really thinking about things in a new way. I know I am. If we could stop sharing the screen, then we could see everybody's face, if you don't mind. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. So we want to invite you to ask any questions that you have, in a concise way. And you can do it by raising your hand, or you could write it in the chat. Deb Daniel has a question. What would be the borders of Israel and Palestine in an agreement?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I need to say that if there is going to be an agreement with Hamas, it's going to require international intervention. And the Americans have been extremely forthcoming in their support of any attempt to get to an agreement. But beyond the Americans, what me and my friends have been dreaming about is a multinational pan-Arab force, peacekeeping force in Gaza, because you can imagine that the Israelis would not be satisfied to have Hamas reestablish themselves as the major political force in Gaza, but an Arab peacekeeping force committed to maintaining the ceasefire could be introduced into Gaza, and they could supervise, with international support, they could supervise the beginning of rebuilding Gaza. People estimate that it will take about 20 or 30 years to rebuild what we've destroyed in Gaza. But beyond that, in 2002, all of the Arab countries signed on to a Saudi Arabia inspired an agreement, a plan for peace in the Middle East, which would mean a return to the 67 borders. If you like, I'll put the map back up, but a return of Israel to the 67 borders and a negotiation of shifting some of the borders, because most of the Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank are living close to the former, it's called the Green Line, the former 67 border. So if we stretch that border a little bit eastward, we would be able to include 80% of the Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. And then only 20% of the settlers who live deep inside Palestine would have to move. On the other hand, and Gaza would be, there would be a link between Gaza and the West Bank, which could be fortified and secured. It's only about 40 kilometers between the north part of Gaza and the south part of the West Bank. And that's the general plan. Now, if you remember, in 2005, Israel agreed and pulled 7,000 settlers out of Gaza. And it was a terrible time for Israel, an enormous upheaval in Israeli society. So if you think about 20% of 500,000 settlers, that's an awful lot of settlers that we would have to tear out of their settlements. And there are now creative suggestions of how we might leave those settlers deep inside Palestine, but they would become Israeli citizens living in a foreign country. Just as an Englishman can live in France and maintain his English citizenship, these would be Israelis voting in Israeli elections, keeping their Israeli citizenship, but living inside of a country called Palestine. And there is a movement called A Land for All. You can Google it. And they have a very intriguing plan of how this could work out. So that's more or less the general lines. Returning, so that would leave the Palestinians with 22% of Palestine. You remember that I said in the 1947 UN partition agreement, they would have received 48% of Palestine. So the fact that Palestinians can talk about their willingness to accept 22% of Palestine is a breakthrough. And this has only been since 1988 that Yasser Arafat agreed that there could be an agreement between him and Israel for them to have an independent country in 22% of what was originally Palestine. So that's a long answer to a short question, but I hope it was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. You don't get questions. Ilka's saying that she's concerned that we here in the States don't get much news of the Israelis who disagree with Netanyahu. Yeah,
that's unfortunate. um, you know, like any well-meaning movement, we're busier doing what we do than we are publicizing what we do, and we do need to pay attention to that. But yes, there is. I guess, I mean, you're over there and I'm over here, so you know what you're talking about. I don't. What you see on the campuses looks like hatred of Israel, but sprinkled among those demonstrators are organizations, Jewish organizations, of people who love Israel and are opposed to the government's policies today. So, but they don't, apparently the publicity is not, people are not getting the word about that. You know, the peace movement is generously supported by people all over the world, particularly in America, and so some people are aware of what we're doing, but no, absolutely, we don't do a good enough job of getting the word out about the resistance to our government.
Yoav, I have a question. What would it take to make a regime change?
Well, it could happen in one of several ways. We do have impeachment on the books. It is a possible process. I, along with many other people, I think something like 60% of the Israelis in recent polls understand that Netanyahu's primary motivation is political. So if the Attorney General were to pull herself together, and she has done an amazing job of resisting the attempts to overthrow the legal system, but impeachment is one option to actually point to the evidence that indicates that Netanyahu no longer has the welfare of the well-being of the country as a first priority, but rather his own personal interests. The other thing that could happen that hasn't happened, you know, Netanyahu is not alone. He's keeping together his majority in the Knesset, in our parliament of 64, in a parliament of 120 parliament members. He has 64 members, and not one of those people, including in his own party, people who have a lot to gain if he falls, none of them has had the courage to resist his policies. They are all his lackeys, for lack of a better word, and they're towing the line. But that could change. There could come a critical point when members of the Likud or the government could say, we are no longer with you. One of Netanyahu's greatest fears is that the extreme right-wing part of his government would break up the government if he moved towards peace. So that's another reason for him not to do that. But that could also work. If public pressure and international pressure were to bring about a situation where Netanyahu had no choice but to move towards an agreement to free the hostages and the Palestinian prisoners, his government could fall apart. By the way, another thing that could bring about Netanyahu's capitulation is if the United States got tougher with Israel. The United States has been incredibly supportive, and the trip that President Biden made in the first days of the war to come over here and to send an aircraft carrier and then 2 aircraft carriers, I mean, the amount of support has been amazing. But if I were an American today, I would be saying to Biden, why are you supplying one-ton bombs that destroy entire neighborhoods when Netanyahu is being so difficult about moving things ahead. I think the United States needs to put teeth in its approach to Israel and to actually begin to indicate that they will cut back on their arms exports to Israel's army if we continue to be intransigent. Just today, Germany announced that they are slowing the flow of their arms to Israel. But the United States, when I used to do reserve duty, I was a munitions technician for a while, and you'd be amazed. Every box of ammunition that I handled said "Made in the USA" on it. And, international pressure needs to be more than diplomacy. There actually needs to be, you need to put your money where your mouth is and to say, we are not going to keep supplying your army so that you can go on conducting a war that has no horizons, it has no strategy. But the New York Times wrote about this beeper attack. It was brilliant tactically and terrible strategically. And I think that needs to sink in, and I hope that Biden, along with Kamala Harris, who hopefully will be elected and follow through, they need to get tough with the Israeli government. It doesn't mean they need to sever ties or abandon us. That would be a disaster, but they certainly could shift gears into what you might call tough love. We love you, but we're not going to keep feeding this terrible ongoing war.
So we have some power here in the United States, both in terms of our government, but in terms of us as citizens and bringing pressure to bear on Biden. So that's a very hopeful thing. I think we can all maybe make a commitment to do that after this discussion, to contact our Congress people and the president himself. Palma, you've been patiently waiting.
I really, really appreciate this conversation. I am a Quaker. I don't know if you're familiar with the Ramallah Friends School.
Yes, I am.
The folks who work there, and we've had some people in our Quaker meeting. We are a peace church, and it's very, very difficult because my good friend Jody, who just had to sign off, unfortunately, she and I have been talking a lot about how do we bring people together for conversations like this. And I think it's really important for our American friends to all get together to talk about things really honestly and openly. So I really appreciate this. Thank you. And if you have any ideas for how we can do that, I'd appreciate knowing what you think.
Well, thank you, Palma. First of all, if I were living in the States right now, I think what I would want to do is to connect with Palestinians. In other words, to open dialogue, to demonstrate, not on the street, but to demonstrate that people can sit in a room together and share each other's perspectives and talk. And I must tell you that I had the opportunity to take a group of teenagers, half of them from Israel and half of them from the Friends School in Ramallah, and we went to Austria. The Austrians invited us to spend 10 days away from the conflict, encountering each other. And it started off very, very tense. And by the end of the week, the Palestinians were insisting on coming along with the Israelis to Mauthausen, to the extermination, to the concentration camp, an hour and a half outside of Vienna. And I will never forget that when we were in the gas chambers at Mauthausen, the electricity went off, and all you could hear was these teenagers weeping together. And when we came out into the sun, there was a Palestinian with his arm wrapped around the shoulders of an Israeli, and they were weeping together. So, you know, the Friends School was just extremely supportive of this kind of grassroots coming together. And, you know, the solution to the conflict is going to come from the bottom up as well as from the top down. The politics are important, but if there isn't the human infrastructure of people who had had an experience of listening to someone from the other side and understanding him, even if they don't agree with him, we need both things to be going on. And your folks over in Ramallah made a great contribution to this back then.
It's a very special place. It is.
Yeah. Have you been there?
I have not, but I've learned a lot about it. I saw a presentation this summer at our New England Friends gathering from the Ramallah, the person who heads the school, and one of our members was a teacher there, and it was just really great to hear her and what she had to say.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was beautiful. Thank you. We have two more questions in the chat. Is there a consensus? This is from Lynn Goldfarb. Is there a consensus among peace-minded Israelis and Palestinians regarding their desired outcome of our upcoming U.S. presidential election? What do you see as the immediate implications of each potential outcome?
Oh, well, I think the conservative right-wing Israelis are hoping that Trump will win, and the peace camp is hoping that Kamala Harris will win, because Trump looks like an unexploded firecracker, and really have no idea what to expect from him. But if his record is any indication of what would happen, it's quite frightening to me, and to most people in the peace camp. And as I was saying earlier, I would like to see Biden, and after him, Kamala Harris, taking a more assertive stance regarding a future for the Middle East. And I think they have the power to influence world opinion and Israeli public opinion, even Palestinian opinion, and getting people to move towards drying up the swamp. I forget who said it, but oh yeah, I read it in an article today about, you know, you want to get rid of the mosquitoes, don't keep swatting them, dry up the swamp. And that's what we need to do, is to end this conflict. You know, this is not the first Gaza war. This is the 5th Gaza incursion. We have been in and out of Gaza over the last 20 years, and it's not changed anything. So yeah, I can only tell you that I still have American citizenship, and I never felt that I had the right to vote in an American election because I adopted Israel as my home, until Donald Trump came along. And he provided the inspiration for me to finally cast my vote from Jerusalem, because I felt like, as a world citizen, I really needed to do something to contribute to resisting him. So yeah, I think I'm not a spokesman, but I think most people in the peace camp would sign off on what I just said.
Thank you. Steve, you asked about U.S. military aid to Israel and its role in the prospects for a ceasefire. Do you feel like that's been answered?
It's been answered eloquently. And again, I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yoav, I want to ask you, we have a question from Leora, and then we'll take maybe one more question, then we'll end.
I think
Um,
Ann Peck has a question.
Ann
as
Peck
well.
has one? I didn't see it. Your hand up, Ann? Or, oh, your hand is up. Okay. Ann Peck.
No relation, of course.
Not at all.
Back to the Palestinian state and the possibility of one. It seems to me that the people that left Gaza were mainly secular. And the ones, those 20% that are deep in the West Bank, are Messianic, ultra-religious Jews. Is there any way that they can be made to leave? And is there any possibility that efforts will be made to have them leave?
Yeah, you're right that a large majority of the people deep inside the West Bank are deeply religious and believe that they are fulfilling God's will by living in the greater land of Israel. And some of them have been quoted as saying that if there's ever an agreement that requires us to evacuate our homes, and my son, the soldier, comes along to evacuate us, I won't hesitate to shoot him. You know, they are quite extreme, some of them, not all of them. And yet, there is some division among them, and some of them do feel committed to the country. I don't know if they feel as committed as they do to their Bible and to their beliefs. But that will be a painful, evacuating them will be painful, which is one of the reasons that I am really taken with this fairly new idea of a land for all, the organization called A Land for All, that intends to leave those settlements where they are, and instead of tearing people out of their homes, to actually work with them, to ask them to accept that they will remain Israelis, but they will be living in a country called Palestine. And many people think that that's a likelier scenario than it is to imagine them peacefully leaving their homes. But I'll never forget when Ehud Barak was prime minister, and there was the possibility of peace with Syria. I was leading a management development program for high school principals, and some of them were from the Golan Heights. And there was a big argument between them. One principal said, if there's a peace agreement, I'm going to destroy my house before the Syrians get back to it. And then this woman principal said, I'm not. If there's an agreement that my government has made with the Syrians, I will put clean sheets on the beds and flowers in a vase, and I will leave my house looking good. You know, so, and these were all religious people, some more extreme, some more moderate. But I think there's even a controversy there that we will have to win their hearts over in some way. But I'm an optimist, and I believe that that is possible.
Well, lovely. Leora left, but she wanted to make a comment. She said, just as a white American, I'm obligated to learn about the perspectives of people of color at home and around the world. White Americans have oppressed. I have attempted to learn about Palestinian standpoints, and I encourage people here to do so.
Yeah,
amen to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just think about it. You know, you are in Hartford, right?
Mm-hmm.
So just imagine the Hartford newspaper covering a group of 25 Jews and non-Jews, Palestinian Christians and Muslims sitting together to talk about what's going on and having clear rules for how they would talk to each other. And I mean, I think that would make headlines, and it would be very impactful. So, yeah, you know, I don't like Arab music. You know, I really, I was raised with an ear for Western music. So I have never learned to really like Arab music. And every time I try to listen to Arabic music, I feel like I'm stretching my soul, not my ears. My ears are big enough as they are, but my that's thanks to my father. But my soul, you know, it's not enough for me to say I don't like that music, I'm not going to listen to it. My friends, my Palestinian friends, adore this music, so I get the words printed out in Arabic, and I'm studying Arabic, so it's a good exercise. And I try to get myself to enjoy the scales that they use, because they're so foreign to me. And I'm just sharing that because in order to put yourself in someone else's shoes, you really need to stretch, and it doesn't feel easy or natural at first. But you know, I'm always amazed. You know, some Palestinian laborer will be outside my house working for the city or something, and I don't have to have a whole conversation. If I just say good morning, how are you in Arabic, you can see this smile open up on his face. People really want to be connected. And when I experience that time after time, it just inspires me to carry on. And really, you all could do it in your own community, probably more easily than I can do it here.
Interesting.
So,
Oh, let's see, wait, I think there's one more. I appreciate folks reading it to try and find it. One thing, Palestinians had reasons to view the original UN partition plan as unfairly favoring Israelis and rejecting it for that reason. I encourage folks here to learn about why. For another, violence has already erupted in the West Bank, mainly towards Palestinians, and it had been getting worse even before October 7th. It got dramatically worse than that after. I encourage folks to learn about it. And that's from, Leora. Leora is, I guess, still here. Thank you, Leora. Thank you for your comments. And Lynn wanted to know, we'll make this the last question, except I have one more question. Have there been any youth-oriented efforts that have brought together Israeli and Palestinian musicians? Wanted to know.
so I'm sorry.
Have there been any youth-oriented peace efforts that have brought together Israeli and Palestinian musicians?
Yes, yes, musicians was the question.
Yeah,
There's a
musicians.
wonderful chorus, the Jerusalem Youth Chorus, which brings together East Jerusalem Palestinians and West Jerusalem Jews, and they sing together, and they are marvelous. They do songs in Arabic and in Hebrew and in English. They sang this year. You know, every year on Memorial Day, we have an alternative Memorial Day, because we in the peace movement, we're not willing to just remember the Israelis who have been killed. So we do a joint memorial service, and this chorus, these teenagers sang together. And there are other musical, in this period of time, most of those activities have ended. In Jerusalem, kids can get together, but since October 7th, the Palestinians can't get permits to come out of the West Bank into Israel. So we can't unless we go to the West Bank, we can't have joint Palestinian-Israeli gatherings. So we go down to the Dead Sea to meet Palestinians from the West Bank, but it's much more awkward and difficult to get Palestinians into Israel. But there were, yes, there are many different initiatives to have people sharing music, and particularly teenagers and young people.
Oh, that's wonderful. I have one more question for you. This is kind of going back to the shadow side, but to what extent do you think it's the fear of going to prison that's motivating Netanyahu? And I think motivates Donald Trump too, but to what extent do you think that motivates him?
Yeah, I mean, his 3 trials are more or less on hold. So that is another impact of his foot dragging about a peace agreement. And people increasingly say that it's not foot dragging, it's a deliberate undermining of anything that can bring us closer to a ceasefire. And of course, he does not want to be photographed in in prisoner's garb and spend any time in jail. And I have no personal need to see him in jail. I'd be happy to see him having a gin and tonic on a beach in Brazil. That would be enough for me. But yeah, you know, I some people have tried to psychoanalyze Netanyahu, but I have not had him on my couch, and I don't think I could figure out all of what's motivating him. I think he's working on his legacy, and he does not want to be remembered as the man who brought about the worst disaster in Israel's history, but rather as the man who rescued Israel from terrible peril. And if the peril has not been terrible enough, he's doing what he can to make it worse before he can come in and save the day and be remembered as the savior of Israel. But I'll remind people who don't know, or I'll just say that he was quoted a few years ago. Someone asked him about his future, his vision of the future, and all he said was, "We will forever live by the sword." And for a leader of a country to propose a future that reads that way, "We will forever live by the sword," is quite frightening to me. Okay, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to say that because this is a comment more than anything, because of the political situation in this country, which is very divided, and there's very little communication between the two sides. I've been doing some workshops with other people on how do you begin talking to these people that you disagree with so thoroughly. And the theme of the workshop is substitute curiosity for judgment. And it sounds like that might help along those lines too.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ear. Really.
That's lovely. Yeah, very important. Well, this has been just an illuminating hour and a half, almost hour and a half. It's really, Yoav, I can't thank you enough. It's midnight there, a little after midnight there.
Yeah,
And
I'm making breakfast here.
Really, you've just given us a lot to think about and to chew on, and I think even a concrete path, because bringing pressure to bear on our government to stop the flow of arms to Israel would really be a tremendous help, and the kind of pressure that we could bring to bear is very important. So if anybody feels so inclined, you could write letters and call your congresspeople in the White House, and it makes a difference. And you can talk to your friends and your family about it too. And so we thank you so, so much. Everybody, thank you for being here, for your comments and your presence. And let's continue, besides everything else that we do, let's continue praying for peace and an end to this insanity.
Thank you so much, Donna.
Thank you,
And
Donna.
thank you all. I really, I don't know if you get it, but for me to be able to express how I'm feeling to you is really nurturing for me. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And if something comes up and there's something else you'd like to kick around, Donna has my email, and I'll be happy. I'm usually quite responsive to emails. So.
And Yoav has a blog. If you'd like to sign up for it, it's called Jerusalemheart. And he has very, very interesting things to say, obviously. And it's a way to keep in connection with him and hear his thoughts.
Thanks so much, Donna.
Thank you. Thank you. Blessings to you. Stay safe, Yoav.
Good night to you all.
Thank
Especially
you,
Thank
to
you.
my-
Thanks, Yoav.
Especially to my family members.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Donna.
It's great.